If you've been following my videos for a while, you probably know that LSAC has removed the logic games section and replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section beginning with this past August LSAT. What you may not know, however, is that the logical reasoning section is changing as well. I'll walk you through the recent changes and what they mean for your LSAT prep going forward. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, LSAC removed the logic game section as the result of a lawsuit from blind test takers who contended they were at an unfair disadvantage because they couldn't benefit from diagramming the way other test takers could, which is a pretty fair point if you ask me. LSAC, however, denied their requests for accommodations on this point. LSAC required them to do the logic game section like everyone else, and ultimately had to settle the lawsuit, agreeing to change the test for everybody and completing their research and development into that new version of the test within the next 4 years from fall 2019 to fall 2023. LSAC ultimately decided to simply scrap logic games entirely and add a second logical reasoning section instead. So you would think logical reasoning would remain the same as it always had been. And if you ask LSAC, they will tell you logical reasoning is the same and that there are no new question types, which is true to a point. There are no new question types, but the proportion of question types on the LSAT is changing as a clear result of the logic games removal. Because starting in fall 2023, after LSAC completed their research and development, we started seeing a whole lot more logical reasoning questions in the unscored extra experimental sections involving formal logic, conditional reasoning, testing your knowledge and understanding of numbers versus percentages. And so it seems that since LSAC can no longer test these concepts in logic games, they have decided to test them in the logical reasoning section instead. So for anyone taking the LSAT going forward, you're going to want to brush up on your understanding of these concepts. And I'll share with you a couple of examples of the types of questions that I mean. And these go back decades. So again, it's true, these are not some radical, new, bizarre question type. These concepts have always been on the LSAT, but again, we're going to see a whole lot more of them in the near future. Reports from test takers tell us as much. So for example, prep test 30, going back 25 years, we had an inference question about inspired musical performances. In prep test 44, a flaw question testing your understanding of numbers versus percentages. We had a question about Clara Schumann, who plays the piano. We have a question from prep test 53, a parallel reasoning question about April rainfall. Diagramming would likely be useful here. And finally, prep test 58, a sufficient assumption question about handmade wigs. Once again, diagramming would be useful here as well. And so you're hearing me say diagramming would likely be useful. That's because LSAC is including enough concrete statements here, enough conditional statements here, where it may be too much work to hold all of this in your head. And so making a diagram with those conditional statements, your X arrow Y type deal, would likely be useful because this is pushing beyond the limits of your normal, typical short-term working memory. Now, if you're using the new LSAT numbering system from 101 to 158, you can just Google those topics that I referenced to find the question in the new LSAT format. I just referenced the old 1 to 94 system because that's what I'm personally more familiar with, and my notes are in that format. Of course, I'll adjust everything for you if you're taking the LSAT and joining my program in the near future. Speaking of which, if you'd like my help whenever you're taking the LSAT, there are a wide variety of ways that I could support you. At LSAT Unplugged, we offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now, the examples I gave, inference, flaw, parallel reasoning, and sufficient assumption, we'll probably be seeing a whole lot more of those in the near future, so make sure you brush up on those. But the three most common types of logical reasoning questions that you should be aware of are inference, flaw, and necessary assumption. And while inference and flaw questions can sometimes involve formal logic, meaning that diagramming may sometimes be useful for these question types, for necessary assumption questions, alternatively, it's going to be a lot more informal logic, meaning that you're not going to want a diagram. And so you're going to want to make sure in that case instead to take the argument at face value, to simply interpret the argument as if you were having a conversation with someone. What's the evidence? What's the conclusion? What's the gap? How reasonable is the argument? And what are the underlying necessary assumptions? Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.